So, Greg, let's talk a little bit about Cook City here. Um, so, there have been some wolf sightings around Cook City just recently. I mean, this is kind of beyond the wolf that was shot there, but there have been some recent sightings there. Um, and there's some concern among residents. I understand. What have they told you?
So we had a couple weeks ago. There was a pet dog, an older dog that the owner let out in the morning, and or it was still dark, and it was attacked by a pair of wolves, and subsequently died of its injuries. And that's an incident that kind of sounds like got some residents pretty concerned. But wolves have been in and around Cook City, quite a bit in the last month or so. And so they've typically they've been in and around town during the night. Right at this point they've seemed to be fairly wary of people during the day, but have been seen in town at night.
Any idea why we're seeing wolves up there at this time of year? I mean, it would seem like they should be more over toward the Lamar Valley.
No real idea. I mean, it's not uncommon. Cook City's really close to the park, and it's not uncommon for wolves, especially in that area, to move in and out of the park. So even this time of year.
Okay. I've seen some postings on Facebook. Some residents seem to think that there might be a possibility that wolves have been baited into that area. Have you guys investigated that at all?
Well, we've seen the same postings. We had some reports of people feeding foxes. We went in and investigated that, and it wasn't true. We haven't found any evidence that people are baiting wolves. No.
Okay. Now, there aren't any ranches or livestock up in that area, right?
I don't think so. I think this is we're really talking about wolves in and around residents, not around livestock.
So you think these wolves are going to stay there for the winter, or are they just passing through?
Well, it's hard to tell. I don't think they're passing through. I think they're coming in and out of the park. They seem to be kind of in that area. Hopefully, they'll decide to frequent another area, and the concern can die down, and we can have a regular winter up there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How are you communicating with the residents here? There aren't a lot of them, maybe 150 or 200 or so. Are you holding meetings, or what are you doing?
Well, we've been up there. We've had a presence up there quite a bit, and we've been talking to people, wardens and our wolf biologist specialist up there, Abby, and our wardens have been talking with folks. We haven't had any official public meetings yet. It's certainly not off the table, but we've been up there quite a bit in and around the community, just responding to concerns, trying to monitor what the wolves are doing. We've got some trail cameras set up to try to get a better idea of their routes and habits and what's going on, so we can figure out how to proceed if there's anything we can do.
All right, so you are doing some studies up there.
Oh yeah, we're trying to monitor the situation as best we can. It's when you have wildlife that's in and around town, particularly predators like wolves. I mean, that's a concern. Because it increases the likelihood that they get to be used to being around residents, might get get a food reward if they find dog food on a porch or something like that. That's not real common with wolves, but these wolves obviously are a little more comfortable than the typical wolves being in and around communities. And our the next big concern is if they start to show signs of being comfortable approaching people or something like that, then that's a real concern for us.
What do you do then?
Well, we don't really have a choice in that matter. I mean, we don't like to be in the position as an agency to kill wildlife, but if it's a mountain lion, if it's a bear, if it's a wolf, and they start approaching people, we don't have a choice. We're going to have to use lethal measures at that point.
You wouldn't look at relocation at all?
It's really tough with wolves, particularly when there's a human safety issue. So a wolf, gets comfortable around people, comfortable enough that they're not scared of people anymore, then relocating them somewhere else isn't typically a good solution.
Okay. What are you hearing from people there? What are they asking you about? What are their opinions? What are they telling you?
Well, we hear from both people that aren't comfortable with the wolves there, that want us to do something and do something now, and people that are there to see the wolves and really place a high value on those wolves, particularly the ones that are coming in and out of the park, which is what these wolves are. And they wanted us to do everything we can to protect those wolves. And so we're kind of in the middle, which is, that's kind of our role is to manage wildlife, and sometimes that puts us in the middle. But like I said, we don't want to kill wildlife. That's not what we want to do as an agency. But if these wolves start to show any sort of aggression towards people, then we really forces our hand.
Well, I imagine that you're in the middle with your own clients or constituency as well, because you're regulating hunters, yet you're also providing trails and other facilities for the people who want to do wildlife viewing.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? How do you manage it?
Well, the good thing is that a lot of what we manage, just broadly, are things that people are passionate about in Montana. The wildlife, the wild places, the opportunities to hunt, the opportunities to see wildlife. I mean, those are all things that we really take pride in managing in Montana. And so sometimes that puts us, in a very local sense, like we have in Cook City, that puts us in the middle of kind of the push and tug. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we have a responsibility to manage wildlife and humans and be responsible for human safety as it pertains to wildlife. And so that there's always that sort of push and tug, but when it comes to human safety, the line all of a sudden becomes pretty clear.
Human safety.
Yeah.
All right. How do you coordinate with the park, with Yellowstone, and also with Gallatin National Forest, because you've got the big wilderness area, almost 1 million acres of wilderness right next to it there?
Yeah, you bet. We work with partners all the time, and the Park Service in particular, in and around the park, and in this circumstance, I mean, we're talking to them, daily. When wolves are, the boundary's pretty clear. When wildlife is in the park, that's the park manages the wildlife when they're there, and when they're outside the park, they're our responsibility to manage. But we talk back and forth with their folks all the time.
Okay. How do you feel about this proposal from a Bozeman lawmaker to create a buffer zone around the park where there would be no hunting?
Yeah, I don't have really any opinion on it. Our ability to have a quota of 0, which would essentially shut down hunting in Wolf Management Unit 313 and 316, which are the two bordering the park. That's limited by legislation. So legislation that has been passed previously has said that you can't have a quota of 0 in those two districts. So we can't, in effect, that prevents us from creating a buffer zone. If the legislature, decides that they feel like that there needs to be a buffer zone, I mean, that's sort of up to them. From our standpoint, our operating procedure now is, there is no buffer zone. It's prohibited by law to have those quotas at 0. So we set quotas in those two districts, hunting wolf management units. We set those quotas through a very public process, through our season setting process. So we got lots and lots of comments. The last time those quotas came before the Fish and Wildlife Commission, they took lots and lots of comments. We had a proposal higher than, the department had a proposal higher than what was adopted by the commission. The commission heard from a lot of people and felt that 2 wolves in each WMU was a compromise position, knowing that we couldn't have 0 because we were precluded by law, and that people were still concerned. And so the quota of 2 wolves, from the department standpoint, is very conservative biologically. The wolf population in that area can easily handle a quota of 2 wolves in each district. But so balances sort of that issue with the concern from some of the wolf watcher community that they didn't want any hunting there. So
I guess I'm a little bit confused. So you can't like partition off a part of a district and say that there's no hunting in that part of the district.
Right.
It's got to be all or nothing.
Well, the way the legislation was written was to preclude us from either by quota or by districting to preclude any sort of buffer zone around the park, and it was intentional. At the time, this wolf hunting around the edge of Yellowstone Park has always been controversial, and at the time it was legislation in response to that controversy. So legislation that said, you know, we're not going to close hunting, we're not going to create a buffer zone around the park. So, you know, if there's legislation that comes down this session that, you know, changes that, then we'll follow those rules too.
What kind of problem does it create for you to have, say, a 5-mile buffer zone? I know that's a number that's been thrown out there.
Yeah, I don't know that it creates a problem from a management standpoint. I mean, it would in effect move the boundary of the park. You know, so the wolves would have, you know, the wolves would essentially, you know, instead of having the park boundary, you know, be sort of the boundary of where hunting would occur, would move that boundary out however far that buffer zone, and then it would be the sort of same scenario.
If the intention of that is to protect park wolves, do you think it would accomplish that?
Well, it depends. It depends on what the wolves are doing. So wolves are creatures that can move, you know, vast distances in a short amount of time. You know, I was on a monitoring flight a few years ago, and in the Bitterroot, and you know, a wolf was in one drainage in the evening, and in the next morning was 27 miles away in another drainage. I mean, they can just move a long distance, and so, you know, the impact of a buffer zone really, from a wolf standpoint, would really depend on how far the wolves would move. And so if wolves that sort of frequent that park boundary area decide they want to move, you know, 10 miles, I mean, you know, then the buffer zone's sort of irrelevant.
Do you have any studies, or does the park have any studies on the habits of these wolves? How far out do they range, do you know?
Yeah, I don't know. For these particular wolves, they seem to be really concentrated right on that boundary area.
Okay. And I'm sorry to go back to this, but in light of the questions that people have and the legislation that may or may not be changing, do you have any plans to hold a public meeting up in that area?
We're not that I know of now, but it's certainly not off the table. I mean, we've been getting a lot of public feedback and public comment just on the situation from all over the country. You know, we've got you know, we've heard from a lot of people locally, but we've heard from people, you know, from all corners of the country on this, and some people are pretty passionate about those wolves that they see in Yellowstone.
Does that put a lot of pressure on you and on your managers?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, maybe, but I go back to the fact that it's tough now, but it really represents just the passion people have for the resources that we manage, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be an agency that is managing, you know, resources that people really, really care about, because they care about what you do, and it's tough. There's tough decisions to make sometimes, and sometimes that really upsets people, but it's not a bad thing for the public to be engaged with what we're doing.
And do you feel like one group or the other has more influence on the public and maybe on lawmakers, either hunters or the naturalist people?
No, not really. I mean, you know, this is a really focused problem. It's right around Cook City, but there's legislation that's coming up, you know, at the legislature now that's looking at expanding the ability for hunters to harvest wolves. You know, removing the limit on number of wolves that hunters can take in Montana, taking some of the restrictions there are on trapping. There's potential legislation that would allow hunting at night, and so we have, both sides of the issue, I think, are pretty well represented in the public debate right now.